you know, if you hear someone saying, well, hey, you need to believe this, so you go to heaven when you die, I wouldn't cut that person down or anything like that. I think there's grains of truth in that, which is one is that we're saved by faith. And so faith and belief and this idea that we're supposed to believe into something is there. For the Gnostics, though, it was really just knowledge. It was really just this head knowledge that as long as you have your facts straight, then that's the magic ticket to get out of here. The biblical writers, everybody from Paul to Peter to Jesus, these were all good Jewish boys. And for them, faith wasn't simply having your facts straight. It was more what we would call faithfulness. Faithfulness that's a lifestyle. Faith is something you live into. I would think of it as crossing a bridge. Let's say you see a bridge and you're not sure if the bridge can hold your weight. And the Gnostic would say, well, I can see that the bridge, it's made out of this material, and I weigh this much, and I estimated the bridge could withstand this much pressure, so I know that the bridge could carry me. All right, you know it. That's great. The person of faith and faithfulness walks across the bridge. That's the difference between just knowing something and the kind of faith the Bible calls us to, which has the full weight of our lives behind it. So when someone says you need to believe such and such, even in this story, the belief plays into that. It's the door that you walk through in order to live a life of faithfulness, being part of God's plan of restoring this world. And when this person says that, you know, I want you to believe this so you can go to heaven when you die, we do believe that there are two alternatives. There's the good one and there's the bad one. We certainly want people to be part of the good one. We just want to be careful of this image that you're going to spend eternity floating on clouds playing a harp in some heavenly place. When you see heaven depicted in the movies, the ever after, it doesn't usually look like this. And we don't know exactly what it's going to look like when God makes a new heaven and a new earth. But I suspect it's going to look more like this than floating on clouds.
Their children were brought up Christians. They even went to school, and I mean, before they went into school, while they were in school, they were going and doing, you know, going over to different countries and helping and working with Bible. I'm not sure what they call that, but they would go on these trips and they would help other countries and do things. They would do missionary work. And then, after being in school and graduating, then all of a sudden, their Christianity just sort of disappeared. They started out in the second group, and they became the first group. It was like their intelligence told them that, you know, yeah, there was just a big bang, and this happened, and, you know, they lost a lot of their Christianity. They noticed that happened with their children. And they couldn't believe it because they were doing all this good work while they were in school. But it was like they got smart and then they got stupid at the same time. I mean, I don't know how else to say that. I mean, do you think that that's happening to a lot of our young people, and that's why that you see that? Because more of them are thinking up here instead of thinking in here, so they're in the top group more than the lower group?
It may be. Without knowing exactly what it was they went through, I'm not sure.
They said they just grew up.
There are some strains of Christianity which I think have given kids some overly simplistic answers and haven't really dealt head-on with some. There's a lot of things in the world that really challenge our faith, challenge the Bible's account of the history of the world, stuff like that. And there are some good ways that you can go about meeting those challenges, and then there's some ways that are maybe kind of overly simplistic. And we hope that if we just give our kids the Sunday school version of the story, that that'll carry them through the rest of their lives. I think sometimes what happens is they get to the point where the Sunday school version of the story doesn't carry them through, and they find people who actually do think deeply and have wrestled with the evidence that's out there and have come to different conclusions and said, well, these people are really wrestling through it. At least these people are thinking about it. So I don't know if that's maybe they went through. The question of, for instance, the age of the earth. We're dealing with Genesis chapter 1 here. And was the earth made in 6 days, or is what we found out through science perhaps more accurate? In which case, are there ways to read Genesis 1 that are still faithful, but allow for a colder earth? I think kids wrestle with those questions because they're going to face that when they get out into the world. And maybe if they have parents that just say, no, 6 days, stop asking questions. That is not helpful to people who really want to wrestle with this stuff and sort it through. So I don't know, maybe they just had questions that they wanted to wrestle through, they wanted to think through. And maybe that, and I'm not trying to comment on your friends, right? The people who raise these kids, I don't know where they're at.
But I mean, I've talked to other families that have had the same experiences, where their children have just said, gee, you know, look at this guy, Socrates or Plato, whatever, look at how intelligent they were, what they believe in, or Steve Hawkins or whatever, you know. How do you answer those? I mean, I don't know how to answer those questions with my own children, you know, except to be an example. That's, you know, and they do call me up and ask me to pray, so there's got to be some little link in there that's there, but I find it, I don't understand how being smart, so people who think they're really smart and think that there's no God, you know, or that we were monkeys or whatever. I'm wondering why there's still monkeys walking around. So it's confusing. I don't know how to answer that question.
Right. I'd have to look at the particular questions, but something that happened, this is another history lesson, but since around the 1500s, we had a lot of changes in the world. We had two things happened around the same time. One was the rise of science, an era that we call the Enlightenment and scientific method. And around the same time, we had the Protestant Reformation, which is when people started breaking away from the one church, the Roman Church, and we have now Protestant churches that we have now. And those were two things that just absolutely changed the way the world looked. And so for the last 400 years or so, we've been living with the effects of this particular era, Enlightenment thinking, which what we call the modern era. We hear people talk about the modern era, or postmodernism now, or we're moving out of the modern era into a postmodern era. These are cycles of thinking that's gone on in the world. And as the Enlightenment and a kind of thinking that we call liberalism, which is not like being a political liberal, it's a different kind of thinking, but it involved the use of reason and the belief that human reason could get us to all truth, rather than that what we believe, which is we actually need God to give us some revelation from above. As these things progressed, they started asking a lot of questions about the Bible. You know, is this true? Could this be true? What's going on here? Some people started really writing off the Bible. And we had some responses. One of them happened mainly here in the United States, and it was a movement that we call fundamentalism. And fundamentalism actually saw the pendulum was swinging so far this way toward in the direction of science and human reason and all these things that seemed to be really smart but weren't getting us to the answers that we believe are true, that God made this world and loves this world and has a destiny for us all. They looked at that and they said, well, we need to fight this, and they swung the pendulum all the way the other way. And so you got this movement called fundamentalism, and some of that resulted in, it was opposed to any kind of thinking. So once people started thinking and asking questions, they said, wait, don't do that, we've seen where that gets us. So when you have battles about really literal interpretations of the Bible, such as believing that the earth was made in 6 days, some of those things actually didn't come from church history. There was a lot of people, early church fathers in the early days, who said, yeah, it's probably just a metaphor. We don't really know how old the world is. This belief in a six-day earth actually is something that sprung up fairly recently through very literal readings of the Bible as a response to fight off all this scientific onslaught that has come. I want to suggest that neither of those are necessarily the best ways to get at truth. There's another way. We can wrestle through hard questions. We can use our minds. We can use reason. But we can do it in a way that's submitted to God, that's submitted to God's Word, in a way that still honors His Word, still seeks to be led by His Spirit. And maybe come up with some answers that maybe could help these kids when they're wrestling with questions. Again, I don't know what it is that they went through, what their upbringing was like, what the questions were that sent them in another direction. But my wife and I love a guy named Ravi Zacharias. I don't know if you've ever heard Ravi Zacharias. He's an Indian guy who defends the Christian faith. Wow. He's just about one of the sharpest people I've ever heard in my life. Has a degree from Oxford in philosophy, PhD. Just about one of the sharpest people I've ever heard, and adamantly Christian. And he has little short 15-minute talks on the radio my wife catches, and writes books, and just amazing. And you sit and listen to this guy, and it's so inspiring because you hear someone who is smart, who is sharp, fight back some of these other worldviews and these other things that would try to lay claim to us and tell us that, no, this is the real story. And he can just knock them down, and you go, oh my gosh, I can spell his name. Ravi, R-A-V-I, Zacharias, like the name Zachariah, but with an S at the end.
Ravi is his first name.
Yeah. He's Indian. He was raised Hindu. He was so empty because of the life of Hinduism, just left him just absolutely desolate, and he attempted suicide. And somebody brought him the Gospel of John when he was in his bed when he was a teenager, and it absolutely turned his life around. He came over to Canada. He went to school in Canada, then he went to school in Great Britain. And Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, RZIM, I think is his website. Brilliant. C.S. Lewis did the same thing in the middle of the last century. C.S. Lewis wrote, Mere Christianity was one of his biggest books, where someone who was, C.S. Lewis was one of the smartest guys in the history of Oxford, actually. He had to take these exams in order to be a professor at Oxford. He blew everybody else in the history of Oxford out of the water. I mean, absolutely brilliant. Used his brilliancy at the service of the church. Used it to make arguments showing that, yeah, this actually is the most plausible explanation for life on earth. Saved a bunch of people's faith when they were trying to ask hard questions and they weren't getting answers from other places. And C.S. Lewis wrote some stuff that made very intelligent people go, oh yeah, I can be a Christian and use my mind. I can do this. I think people like that are gifts to the church. Now that's not what everybody wrestles with, you know. Some people just need to make the choice to have faith. And no argument can talk them into it, and no argument can talk them out of it. Sometimes it's just a decision. You just say, you know what, I'm going to believe this. And I have to make that decision when I can't come up with all the answers. But I just say, you know what, I'm really not sure about this, but I'm going to choose to move in the direction of Jesus and follow in his footsteps. But at least along the way, I've learned enough that's kept me on the path. Bob, you had something?
Oh, you already said it, rzim.org.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know it? Oh yeah. You like Ravi?
Yeah.
What's been your experiences with listening to him?
Oh, he's right on. I mean, he's a great teacher and just, gives all the answers to, he's well grounded in the Bible. I always learn a bunch of new words too. He's got vocabulary.
Yeah, he is. He's a philosopher.
Challenges me.
Yeah. I've heard some people say like, "Whoa, he seems to be a little over my head." You do have to learn some of his vocabulary. But he's on the front lines. He's absolutely on the front lines in this world, debating people from other worldviews, whether it's Muslim or atheist or any of that stuff. And totally holds his own. Makes me proud that we have people like that.
And if you want to hear him on the radio, 91.1, tune in around 6:30, 6:40. I think it's when he starts.
Is that every night?
In the morning.
In the morning.
And it's kind
So
of
6:30 a.m. It's
It's usually
91,
about 6:40.
91.1.
91.1.
Is that A? Listen to the radio.
And again, don't mishear me. I wouldn't want to suggest in any of this that mere human reason by itself can get you to God. That was the Enlightenment thinking. The Enlightenment thinking said, you know what, we can just use our minds and we can think our way out of this. And when we got into the 20th century, the 1900s, the last century, there was all these high hopes like, oh my gosh, the 1900s is going to be the greatest century in human civilization because we finally had reached the apex. Finally, we were so smart. We were so smart. And the 20th century ended up being the bloodiest century in the history of humankind. Merely thinking is not going to be good. My take, though, is when you see someone like Ravi or C.S. Lewis, what you're really seeing is someone exhibiting this and living into this. That God originally created people to be whole, body, mind, and soul. It was all good, and it should all be used. And so as we use our bodies and move in this world, and allow ourselves to be touched by God deep in our soul, and use our minds to know and love Him. I just preached this week on you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And one of my favorite quotes from my professor is, loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength is not multiple choice. You don't get to pick which one. God gave you all of those, and He wants you to use all of those to love Him. So there's always a balance, but I wonder if maybe, to get back to your question, if maybe when we see some of these kids skating out of the church, it's because they didn't have that balance growing up. It was either just all soul, all emotion, all feeling. You see that in a lot of churches where they're just always encouraged to have the next profound emotional experience. And always trying to push through to that. And then when they stop having those emotional experiences, they say, well, this isn't working. And they move on to something else. Maybe if there had been something else there to stabilize them. Instead.
Hearing this word in my mind, relationship. I myself used to think a lot more about God, but I never had a relationship. Once I had a relationship with Him, then I used that list of qualities that are on that side. Because it was about having a relationship, a two-way partnership with God. And you're not just reading something that's great about God or knowing that God created that or He did this, but the relationship that you have with Him, that love and that grace that just pours through over and over through you in the relationship.
And maybe some of these kids didn't have a real relationship with God. If that's what you're getting at. They had a relationship with religion.
Right.
That was something I mentioned in my message. I used the passage from Mark where the scribe asked Jesus what's the most important commandment in all the law, and Jesus responds, love the Lord your God. And the scribe says, yeah, that's more important than all the sacrifices or burnt offerings. And Jesus says, yep, you're right. They have this great time when they actually agree with one another, because Jesus didn't usually agree with the religious leaders, but at this point they had this moment where they, yep, we both agreed. And what's interesting is the way the scribe put it is that loving God with everything you have, it's more important than the burnt offerings and the sacrifices and all that. But it doesn't eliminate them. Now we're in a new era, we don't do sacrifices or burnt offerings. But we have things that we do that could be considered religious rituals. We have things that we go to church, we sing, we praise, we read scripture, we do these things. Well, loving God with all you got is more important than all of those things, but it doesn't eliminate the need for those things.
They help the relationship.
Yeah, they provide a structure for the relationship, just like when you take vows in marriage, it gives some structure to the relationship. And the Jews, they had this law, and the law was good. Remember we talked about this. The law wasn't given by God as a way to earn his love, as if he didn't really like him that much. But okay, if you follow these rules, then maybe it'll warm up to you. He gave them the law because he wanted them to demonstrate what it meant to live as his people and to be shalom people, where everything's in its right place. So the law was meant to give form to a loving relationship with God. What ended up happening though is instead of having a relationship with God, they had a relationship with the law. This silly thing, it would be as if I went home every night and took out my wedding vows and said, oh, I love you so much. My wife's like, I'm over here. Oh, but these vows, they just mean so much to me. I just remember this day when I made these vows. I just love you. Hello? And the Jews were kind of like that. They had this law that was meant to give form and structure to a loving relationship. And instead of having a relationship with God, they had a relationship with the law. And maybe what these kids have been going through is having a relationship with religion. And it's just a system. And when they get on their own, they're like, well, that system was interesting, but I want to try a new system. That's far different than falling in love with a person. Knowing that person and knowing that nobody could ever replace that person. Because once you know him, nobody else even comes close. So that's hard to say, like, well, did they even know him? But I don't know. Did they even know him?
They're the only ones that can answer that question.
Right.
Years ago, before I got saved, my husband and I thought that our daughter needed God. We didn't think about ours, but our daughter needed God. So we put her in sent her to the Nazarene youth group. And she went to the youth group, and there was a whole lot of kids there. And the youth pastor was young, he had a young wife, and they ended up getting transferred to Colorado. Well, when they left, the group broke up. And years later, my daughter says to me, Mom, do you know why we left the youth group? Why she's bringing this up for, you know? I'm saved now, right? She says, because she said, we had our eyes on the youth pastor and his wife, and not on God. And when they left, everything broke up because we didn't have our eyes on God. They did not have a relationship because they had their eyes on something else. And that's what happens not only to sometimes you have to some Christians also. Instead of having their eyes on God, they got their eyes maybe on ministers or pastors or whatever, instead of having that personal relationship with God. That's what happens. But that I know for sure because my daughter told me after this, she was in her 20s when she told me. And it was like, wow, you know, all of a sudden she knew one. So that's,
Makes you wonder if, especially when you are trying to spread the word in your own way, that if you see simplicity of belief on the other person or a lot of people, you should sort of leave it at that and back away before you complicate things. Let somebody just water the seed for a while and back away.
What do you guys want to do now?
Disneyland.
I had you read some stuff on the image of God. Did you guys read that? Some of the passages I gave you last week.
Oh, yes.
What do you guys think of that?
turning point the Great Commission was.
How so?
And in many ways, I suppose, but when Paul was speaking to the Romans, for instance, here was a Jew coming from the chosen people, speaking to Gentiles, or people at least who didn't worship God, the God, as we know it, planting the new church just in time for these folks. I mean, they didn't have to go through all the trials. Perhaps in their own way they went through trials. But here was the new heaven being presented by the apostles, in this case Paul, was trying to show them how they could see the invisible world basically if they paid attention to it, or if they had faith, they could see it. And I just thought that was these readings, and especially considering the image of God throughout all the passages in Genesis on through, is a great way to understand just how important the commission was getting out there. The apostles to get out there. Timing was perfect.
I have a totally different outlook now on Paul that I've had about him before. He kind of struck me as a guy walking around thinking that he knew more than others and that he was better than others, and he crucified people, one of the disciples, and all of a sudden to see this transformation take place with him. And as you're reading things that he has written in some of the readings that we read, it's just amazing what a loving and caring person that he turned into when he had a relationship with God. And I was really happy to see that, happen, because, I see it in my life and I see it in other people's lives. You can be this person that you might have known 2 years ago where you would just go, oh my goodness. And he was struggling too, and then all of a sudden, I've read passages and had arguments, not arguments, but discussions in church like, wow, I can't talk, I can't have my opinion, I have to go home and speak to my husband. I don't have a husband, who am I going to go home and talk to? But then to understand, when you read more about all around what he's saying, and you really read more about Paul, and understand what a wonderful relationship that he has with God, and how much he wanted to share that with everybody. He went from being A to B, and you got to know him both ways, I found that kind of interesting through these readings.
Also human. Chief of all sinners, right? Greatest of all sinners.
He would say the same thing about himself.
Oh yeah, he did. So, based on your readings, no wrong answers here. What's the image of God? They say if you get 4 different rabbis in a room, you're going to have 5 different opinions. There's no wrong answers here. Based on your readings, what did you come up with? What's the image of God?
Us. We're made in his image.
But what does that mean?
Perfect.
Perfect. So does that mean that you're no longer the image of God?
Sometimes we're perfect.
We must not know we're perfect because we need mirrors still.
If you're fallen, then, does that mean you cease to be the image of God? Because it's only those who are perfect?
No. Even when you fall, you get back up again.
What's it mean to be the image of God?
His image could be his word, too.
No wrong answers.
One of our readings, when anybody behind, those people would grow to become, you know, thorns in their sides. And if they weren't true to what he had commissioned them to do, then he was going to do the same to them. So God's image, in a way, was this image of what he would do to you, of a kind of an action.
Who else? What does it mean to be an image of God?
Colossians, it shows Jesus.
So in Genesis, we can go back to Genesis if you want, if you have your Bible. Genesis chapter 1. We see some things in Genesis chapter 1 that sets people apart as being more special than anything else in all creation. So far, I've just kind of been talking about creation. Now, hopefully, we're going to get down and drill into a little bit more about what is it, why are we part of this creation? Why are we so important? We see that when God creates, first of all, he moves from the most general to the most specific. So he starts with just light and darkness. Light and darkness, sea and sky. Broad brushstrokes. And then as he moves along and creates, he gets more specific. So before it was just light and darkness, now it's sun, moon, stars. Things that are going to rule over the light and darkness. Fish, birds. So he moves from more general to more specific. He also moves from more, what we call static, that means it doesn't move. A rock is static, it doesn't move. To more dynamic, something that moves and is alive. So, sun, moon, and stars, kind of alive? Not really. Moon's just kind of a rock. Water's just water. But then you get to birds and fish. You're moving from things that are more static, more stable, to things that are more alive. All of it is building up to something. And the whole story culminates in verses 26 to 28. Somebody want to read Genesis 26 to 21, 26 to 28? Just 4 verses.